take a plane. I'm not driving back to California in there. Oh, well, okay, so you're trying to fly? Yeah, well, fine, I think that's good. No, grab the main. Okay, then. I guess, do we want to start it right about now? Okay, yeah, alright. Yeah, this is for the panel on the Godzilla anime trilogy. Now, we're going to be exploring both the pros and the cons from it. Though, actually, we kind of were talking a little bit ahead of here, and we were sure enough finding out that, unfortunately, probably for a lot of you who probably have negative views on it, most of us probably have a lot of positives for it. But
yeah, room survey. Who liked them?
Okay, then. All right. Then who did? And people can raise your hands if you didn't like them. No shame in that. All right.
All right. One quick question. So, I've looked up ranking Godzilla films, and the question is: do you count this trilogy as 3 separate films or one film? Since each film picks up where the last one leaves off.
So I'd like to propose something on that front. I don't really think we should consider these movies. We should consider them a 3-part OVA.
That's one way
That's
to
fair.
look at it.
Literally none.
I mean, that's absolutely a legitimate point, and it's something to consider whenever you look. It's like the same people that look at Godzilla vs. Gigan, which is made as part of a big film festival for little kids, and this one movie that they went to go see out of 6 movies that day, and they stack it up against Invasion of Astro Monster, which was sort of more of a big production value standalone thing. And when you look at let's make no bones about it, these movies were made for Netflix. They ran in theaters in Japan, but not in a lot of theaters, and it's about context. So these are basically OVAs. So totally agree with what you say.
They weren't made for Netflix.
They were made for Netflix. Netflix is listed in the credits.
Of the Netflix version.
In theaters in Japan.
Are they not on the Blu-ray?
Yeah,
or?
Netflix was in the credits.
The way it usually
Well,
works
Netflix
is Netflix
basically
puts up the money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's maybe worth pointing out as well. I don't have a source on hand for this, but I'd heard someplace, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this was initially being developed as a series, but then Toho decided they'd rather do it as feature films. Had anyone heard anything to that effect?
I think they did. They were planning originally for them to be about 10 mini episodes or so, and then but
like a 13-episode anime.
Well, 13 more or less, but I mean, that's probably actually what it's. A 13-episode anime would actually probably have worked if you want to expand it even further. Yeah.
The development history of this is a little weird because a lot of things shift over the time period. Basically, what happens is Godzilla 2014 comes out, does very well, so Toho is now interested in making Godzilla films again. They release Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla does very well for a Japanese release film. So well that they decide they'll make another one, but they don't really have the resources in place to make another one, so as a way of getting the Godzilla brand out there before they come out with the next movie, they basically they decide to create a temporary animated series for Godzilla, and the way the animation industry in Japan works right now is you basically take your IP and you go out and try to find a funder, and then once you get your funding, you then build everything after that. The funder they ultimately found was Netflix. Netflix basically paid for the whole thing. Once they had Netflix, they then developed everything after that. Things shifted around, and that's when a lot of the more solid elements, such as the formatting and stuff like that, were ultimately settled on.
Okay. So, I guess getting into these movies, probably, I guess, what confuses a lot of people is kind of, they were expecting big monster spectacle from the very beginning because it was called Planet of the Monsters, but right, sure enough, though, then the original title, though, was Kaijuvision, which means, monster planet in itself, so the S can lead to very confusions, and when we heard there was going to be so many cameos or so, we didn't realize that later on this was actually going to be taking place on a post-apocalyptic Earth, where Godzilla had actually eradicated all of the other ones and taken over for himself. And I think that kind of was, in a way, a little bit disappointing to a lot of people because we were expecting this big monster ball, like a battle royale, and we never seemed to quite get that. But the films themselves, though, and going into it, I actually more or less knew probably where the films were going to take it. I mean, last year, if you actually watched that again about the Planet of the Monsters, around 70 to 75% of what I said was probably going to actually happen with the overall story and arc actually did end up coming to fruition. Now, that doesn't mean I was always correct on everything. Believe me, there were plenty of things in there that I was completely inaccurate about. But if you try to take it from the beginning or so, it's like the story itself was designed to be unreliable in the context of the narration. Because first you have the beginning one, and it seems like it's pretty simple. Okay, we're going out there to kill Godzilla, and throughout the entire trilogy, that's pretty much what it tries to aim for. But the perception I said was going to change about it is because at first, Geno Uebuchi, the writer, I know he loves his scripts, he loves the plot twists. And so right down to the second one, I knew, and he cast this into suspicion right at the beginning with the two aliens of Metphys and then the other alien who was Galgu, that, you know, even if Godzilla seemingly had actually been killed or eradicated, they still would have gone to war. And that gives you a slight hint. I was like, okay, their loyalties kind of seem a little bit suspicious. What happens if Godzilla really is killed? And then so going into the second one, that finally starts to actually aim of where it goes about 90 degrees, where we realize, that, is Godzilla really the villain here? And especially, I said from the beginning, I went into this movie and I end up being correct that Godzilla technically was actually not the villain. In many cases, he was the actual protagonist, if you kind of think about it, because in the second one, he's trying to stop the humans essentially from destroying the planet again by trying to destroy the remnants of Mechagodzilla, because he realizes that how much of a threat it is. And then by the third one, when essentially, you know, the second one fully established that humanity more or less would never reclaim Earth from Godzilla. And at this point, it's come down to the reflection of more on the humans, because how far are they willing to go to get their revenge against Godzilla? And when it comes to bringing out King Ghidorah, you pretty much come to the conclusion on this is going way too far, because all of us know Ghidorah, he's the destroyer of worlds. Why would you think anybody in the right mind would think that would be a good idea?
Did you like the film?
Like, well, especially because I knew it was going for it, and by the end, I was looking at that, and as soon as Godzilla wakes up and he starts taking that turn, I fully come into realization that that's not just Godzilla taking a turn for him having to respond to another disaster. It's like it's him technically taking the full role as being the protagonist at that point, because at this measurement, he's the only thing that's stopping pretty much Ghidorah from actually destroying the planet. And I guess I could probably go with many whimsicals of details on that, but I'll just kind of leave it. But it finally comes to that point that you realize that humanity, once Ghidorah is seemingly banished and all, it's like they have to learn to coexist with Godzilla, which is what I said would be the main theme, coexistence. And in that way, it actually is different from many Godzilla movies, because we never, first of all, see what actually is the aftermath of Godzilla actually managing to destroy civilization, and furthermore, him actually coming out on top, and that humanity just has to learn to live with the consequences of that. So in many ways, when you think about it, like normal stories that would try to go for this would go for the tropish ending of, yes, him being killed off and actually never coming back, and that humanity manages to get redemption, but here they don't. Here the consequences come out in full context, which is in many ways actually true to the Godzilla series of humanity's fortunate evils of always trying to bring about, you know, destruction, and finally nature comes back and it takes it completely over again, and they just have to learn to live with the consequences. So that's kind of my take on a lot of what was going on and stuff. Do you guys have any comments?
Did you like it?
Did you like it? Yeah, that was the question.
Well, that's a boring question, you know.
Yeah, well, I already said in the beginning, like, most of us have positive, so, yeah, I do have a pretty positive view on it, because, like, I pretty much stated from all of those contexts that I pretty much get the script, I got the story, so I am positive on it, so do you guys want to go ahead and give your takes?
I was mostly positive about it, and, like, I don't love every single Godzilla movie as much as I do every other one, you know, like, but I want to try to find what I can appreciate, and take it from that angle, because the story just blew me away. I don't know if an American movie studio, when they saw that script, would have said yes. They might have intervened heavily, but I think they probably would have just said no. I mean, every one of these 3 anime movies, the ending of each one of these 3 is like, oh my, you know, it's crushing. There's so much doom. Like it's just, I love the doom. I mean, I love the attitude. I love that these movies and just the story in general has a lot of balls. They do a lot of stuff that I never thought they were going to do. And I think one thing that gets missed is that this movie has a great message about hate. Haruo let hate dictate all of his actions and make all of his decisions for him. And that's no way to go through life. It's important to eliminate negative emotions and hate, and how hatred can make you inhuman. And it's too bad this message kind of gets overlooked, because people with hatred, they're the ultimate tools. And look what the XXVI and Metphis do with him. He is the ultimate tool for them. He's a conduit for how to destroy Earth using gear. You know, it's just, it's kind of sad. It's tragic. Yeah, there are things in these movies that I had a problem with. I mean, the middle of the second movie, the second time around that I watched the second movie, halfway through, I had like that whole body tiredness going on. I had to go to bed. I slept for 3 hours, and then I came back and I finished it. And I was like, yes, I got it. That in the middle of that second one for me was like, oh wow. I know you guys are talking a lot, but man, and the philosophy part of it's great, but jeez, I don't know. One thing I also liked was the music. I liked it, especially the Ghidorah theme. That is so much that's so much doom going on with that too. And also the ending to the third one, I had seen a spoiler that that's what was going to happen, but I didn't know exactly how it was going to happen. But if someone told me though that there was going to be a Godzilla story that had the main character crash himself into Godzilla, and that the music in the background is totally reminiscent of either Anton Bruckner or Peter Tchaikovsky, I would have been like, no way, you're not going to do it. Really? That's incredible. Thank you. That's so awesome. And I love stories. Every once in a while, I love a story that makes me feel that way. And that just nailed it. The 3-part packaging, though, I wish it had just been a series that we could just see all at once. The way that it was released, like piece, with all this time in between, we didn't know where the story was going, and we had to wait. And they don't do well sitting there independently on their own. You know, like that was the problem I had, was the packaging. And the Godzilla series, though, the style of Godzilla has been expanding forever. You know, we've had every kind of Godzilla movie that there is out there: kids movies, sci-fi movies, young adult movies, a South Sea adventure movie from 1966. You know, there's everything, and you got to keep going in the direction, keep expanding it, and instead of just letting it stand there or just letting it contract. I loved it. I mean, there's problems, but at the same time, the story is really ballsy. I don't know.
Boy.
What was your impression of the film?
As you know, it's all about looking at things in a broader context, and maybe that's just the way that I tend to view things. Is in general, as a work by Polygon Pictures, it's one of my favorites. As a work by Gen Urobuchi, it's not one of my favorites. So there's you gotta sort of think about leveraging your expectations, looking and sort of calibrating when you're going in. And I think that helped me a lot, because I sort of went in thinking, okay, this isn't going to be your typical Godzilla movie. This is going to be like if Tsutomu Nihei made a manga that was a Godzilla movie or something along those lines, because that's what Polygon Pictures does. I think that there's a lot of problems with the anime trilogy. I think a lot of things weren't quite delivered as well as possible. I think that some of the dialogue could have been snappier than it is, but there's a lot of things that I really appreciate it, and because the backlash has been so hyperbolic, I tend to play devil's advocate and come down on a net positive side of it. If it were something that everybody was talking about how it was their favorite Godzilla movies, I would probably be reactionary in the opposite direction.
Yeah, no, I kind of come down on a similar point to that. On an objective level, I don't find them as like unmitigated disasters as a lot of people, at least online, have seemed to. I find the reaction to it a little extreme in a lot of respects, but I do think they have a lot of problems, some of which are their own fault, some of which aren't. I don't think doing it as 3 feature films did the material any favors, especially with those 6-month gaps. Like, that's a bit, like, and for the whole story to not really be resolved at all for a full year after the first movie came out, like, that's a little too long to have to let a movie sit in order to form an opinion on it. And so I think there wasn't enough self-contained story in the first one or in the second one to really form an opinion about them independently, and so that having to wait for the whole rest of the story to come out, I think, hurt them a bit. And they also just seemed kind of meandering. Like, it sort of shows, I think, that they weren't necessarily intended as films, because they don't really feel structured like films. The way the story proceeds isn't very much like films. In a series, you have extra breathing room to go off on tangents and have an episode here focusing on a different character, or an episode here that's kind of a breather and just explores some smaller aspect of the story. But in a film, or in a shorter series of films like these, detours like that feel more like problems, because they don't have the self-contained quality of being episodes. So I think the presentation accounts for a lot of why these films didn't really pull me in too much. But then at the same time, a lot of the ideas that I've seen criticized a lot have been things that I really like. I like that Toho is experimenting more with Godzilla. I like the direction they took Shin Godzilla, just getting a really talented auteur in, and within certain parameters letting him more or less do his thing. I like that open-minded approach, especially after the Millennium series. But at the same time, I feel like it seems like some people wanted like very conventional monster against monster films, which, you know, I don't have a problem with those, but I like that they took the more experimental approach with Mechagodzilla City. That's an interesting idea. That's something we haven't necessarily really seen before, like a whole city that is a war machine fighting Godzilla, or the sort of eldritch cosmic horror, you know, Noodle Ghidorah in the third film. I think that's a really interesting idea, and I think visually and conceptually it's a lot stronger than if we had just had a straight, you know, standard kind of corporeal Ghidorah there. I do think the fight could have had a bit more serious action in it. I think that would have helped more than them just kind of being in place and the characters talking about what's on their, like, instrument readouts. I think that is where I will make a concession to wanting a little bit more conventional action in the climax, but I love a lot of the ideas that the anime trilogy has on paper. And also, being an Eva fan, I have a soft spot for the kind of mind trip in the third one, so, you know, there's that.
Who liked the first one the most? Yeah. Second. Third. Thought so.
That's about what I would expect.
Yeah.
Well, building off some of the points that were mentioned earlier, part of the reason I wanted to, like, just declare early on we need to treat this like an OVA is none of the episodes, none of the films have a 3-act structure. Like, that's straight up one of the issues right there. The first episode basically is a first act of a story. The second film has a bit more structure to it, but nothing, while conflicts are introduced, nothing is actually resolved beyond, you know, they lose Mechagodzilla City. And the third episode, the third film, is basically nothing but reveals and resolutions of things that were established in the earlier parts of this trilogy. That's not traditionally how you're supposed to do a trilogy. Admittedly, the normal model for trilogies are a bit off themselves because most people base it off of Lord of the Rings, which is its own weird genre work. That being said, I actually liked it a lot, but the reasons I liked it, I'm fully willing to acknowledge, are not normally, or to put frank, aren't the reasons I go to see kaiju films. I'm not shocked that most people did not seek these reasons. I like it when characters sit around and talk about things. I like those things. Like .hack//sign is like one of my favorite animes, even though I'm fully aware most people hate it because it's nothing but people sitting around talking. On the flip side, most people do not go to a Godzilla movie. Most people don't go to a movie with the word Godzilla in its name because they want some people to be talking about the nature of reality and, the transitive properties of physical interactions between objects. So it's definitely a more philosophical film than a Godzilla movie usually is, and it's very clear the fights are not the focus. It's very clear. I mean, the climactic battle of the whole series is snakes descending from the sky and biting a guy that he can't punch because for some reason it violates the laws of physics. And we have scientist man in the corner yelling about how this violates the laws of physics.
I hadn't noticed.
It's like, I like that scene a lot, but I'm fully aware that's not a great action climax. It's a very existential despair action climax. It's weirdly arguably one of the best Lovecraftian endings you could get to a work. Like, to the point that that The World Eater, episode 3, is basically one of the best portrayals of an epic horror I've ever seen in film. I would argue even better than the film I used to hold as the best category of this, and that was Mountains of Madness. Was it Mountains of Madness? Mouth of Madness. That's correct. Thank you. But, again, it's not a tradition. It's barely a kaiju movie. And that's probably the problem, that the rule of expectations. Genres are important because they help us understand things faster, but sometimes they can make us poorly equipped for something that's not of the genre. I'm not going to tell people to like this film, you like what you like, but it might help if you just try to face this movie as something else. You might enjoy it better, or, you might not, because it's still 3 movies to have to watch one after the other, and that's a waste of anyone's time.
At the same time, Godzilla is a great vehicle for this kind of a story, especially the third with all this philosophy, that part where this, it's basically like J.S. Bach music is playing when it shows all this, all the ideas and stuff, and how it says we've been intervening in history this whole time and all that. That is really meaty. The whole idea of civilizational cycles does fit into Godzilla quite well, because Godzilla is the product of what humanity created, and then he's the response to it. And then once Godzilla has prepared Earth enough, then Ghidorah gets Earth once it's right. It's this big thing, and it's all about trying to. Haruo is all about trying to reverse that. He's been working against it the whole time. Get rid of Godzilla, go back, and the XF are all about going forward and making it worse. And the XF religion is like this. It's depressive realism. It's kind of like if they made entropy into a religion.
Basically,
they're worshiping entropy. They want to speed it up, and it's. I didn't expect a Godzilla movie to do that again, but.
But do you expect a Godzilla movie written by Gen Urobuchi to do that?
Yes.
Well,
Exactly.
Well, the thing about Gen Urobuchi is what he likes to do is that when he thinks of himself very much trying to be an artist and all, is that he always likes to heavily explore these heavy themes. And the thing in Japan is that they can be very big scientific experts and stuff, like, this theory, this and that. But the problem is, though, is that, common audiences, is like, okay, I don't really care about this whole quantum physics thing, yada, yada, yada. Why could you just try to explain this in simpler detail? And that's the problem, is that he likes to get in very detail. Like, if this could happen, then he really wants to try to nail it into your head as hard as possible. And sometimes it just comes off as a little bit too maybe snarky in some ways. It's like, really, you didn't know about this, and then this, and this, and then so you're like, well, it's not my fault that you couldn't possibly understand. Why didn't you go do some research or something? So Genro Buchi, I mean, for all that it is, though, it's not like I don't like seeing these things and actually, seeing all the scientific aspects of it and stuff. But it does come off as a little bit, it's like you're trying to nail too much information into my head all at once. And maybe I probably, what did I, like you said before, what's the right mindset? Most people are coming in here, maybe probably want to just drop their mind off for a little while and just want to, maybe watch some monsters fight one another and take it easy, which in the Godzilla, and especially from a lot of what's been told of, is that, especially the older movies, is that a lot of people like to do for these movies is they just like to turn their brains off, watch a bunch of guys in suits fight each other for quite some time, and it, acts as a big stress reliever. But here, this is almost going the opposite direction. It's trying to think about, maybe real-world applications and, real reflections on these attitudes and these ideas and how it reflects so heavily upon our own world and actually how it does it in this own fictional world. So I can understand why people just, don't really probably like his style, and again, this is not the first time he's done it. It's like he does it's a pattern, and I guess some people just didn't realize that why it would change all of a sudden, because it just seemed like things changed almost like entire 180, like I said it would, because he just loves plot twists. I think there was a lot of criticisms of inconsistency from movie to movie.
I mean, again, it comes back to that weird, it's not, at least from my perspective, obviously, this isn't universal, but it always kind of came to again, it's that the whole trilogy has a 3-act structure, the individual films do not. So, pretty much the entire first movie is introducing all the stuff you need to understand the rest of the film. The second movie is mostly introducing all of the actual philosophical and thematic problems that are going to be, haunting the rest of the show. The third one is mostly everything going wrong, finally going wrong. So there is definitely a thematic weirdness that I guess it just builds up. I don't know.
Well, no, okay. I guess I could.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on what you mean by inconsistency. If it's just like in terms of the ratio of dialogue to action or something like that, or is it something more like characters suddenly behave differently? What do you mean by inconsistency?
Well, inconsistency is what I said, for example, because I was especially watching one YouTuber who says, looking back on it, Big Inflection, is like his biggest criticism, and like I said before, I already knew it was going into, but he says, the inconsistency is like, why are we all of a sudden, our primary objective, like I said before, the entire series is essentially to kill Godzilla. Why all of a sudden, like in the second one, we go into this big confusion complex of where, like, all of a sudden these guys are turning bad, like the Bill Saluter, like they've rediscovered Mechagodzilla, and then they realize, why are these guys all of a sudden acting like, bad people? Shouldn't we all be poured together to try to kill Godzilla? And then it goes on, and then finally it's like, okay, we have our problem resolved, we're going to try to kill Godzilla, and then it comes back again, it's like, now he's essentially causing overheating, he's trying to melt the entire place down, and he goes, what's happened again? But again, so that's one critique I took into customs, and believe me, I've seen plenty of negativity, like Omnivore. He's like, his specific criticism, of course, was the execution. Everything just seems to be not well done at all, and everything. So, and I look back at that and stuff, like, he's got some points and all, and I get the biggest point is like, everyone was bored. Just is like, I'm sitting here, where's Godzilla? They're talking about stuff. I'm not really drawn into this thing and stuff. And it's like, okay, great, it continues for around 15 minutes. Like, finally, we're finally getting to Godzilla and stuff. And that's really what kind of comes down to, is that people didn't feel that the characters really drew them in enough. It's like, they're pretty much one note, supposedly. But the thing is, though, most of them, other than Haruo and a couple of other characters, they aren't one-layered, as a lot of people like to say, because Haruo does actually have reflections. I mean, if you have to admit, especially in the second one, what he did is that he did start to come to conclusions like, am I really in the right here? And he does reflect on that, especially when he decides to use nanomel and stuff. It's like he's letting his hatred get the better of him to try to kill Godzilla. But as time goes on, he's realizing that the consequences of what he's doing, and everybody else around him, like they're secondary characters. We're supposed to be primarily focusing on him. At the same time, though, it seems like the Bill Saludo, the exit, they're still in the way they're layered. Because, well, the Bill Saludo seemed like, okay, they're on board for this. They're all about trying to kill Godzilla and stuff. They're at the same time pretty much, they're atheists and all, right? And then, they don't believe in the idea, really, of, there's going to be an afterlife or anything. So their only goal is that, evolution should be the only thing. Technology is superior to that. And the X-Sifs is like, what's really interesting about them is that their entire belief system is supposed to be a religion, yet it's completely contradictory to it because they're really essentially a bunch of nihilists, because they just want it to end. And Medphy's portraying himself seemingly as a benevolent individual, just trying to, bring everyone and trying to relieve them. And then all of a sudden it comes down to it that, he turns full, he's the exact opposite. He's like, no, there's probably no God out there, there's not really anything. Like, he just, and the way best to describe it is that, people, they try to need to believe in something. And, the Bill Saludo, they chose evolution. For the X-Sifs, because they realize essentially there is seemingly that everything eventually ends, then at the very least they can serve something better than themselves that they thought of. And in their case, they decided to just worship a destroyer of worlds, which is going, what?
The point of the Bill of Saludo, though, is that they want to merge with technology to become pure logic, and so they're giving up their bodies even, and so, and that is reflective of the idea that humanity views technology as a false solution to all of our problems that doesn't actually work. And with the X-Sif, it's about how is this deceitful cult, and they basically just are trying to make sure the Earth is destroyed by all this. And I don't know, that points to the folly of organized religion. It points to how cults are not the answer. And like, some of this in these anime movies is kind of about how humanity as a whole sort of sucks. And how do we get ourselves out of this? And then humanity ends up trusting technology too much when it doesn't, then when that isn't it. And I can sort of feel that. I mean, there's all kinds of evidence all over the place that humanity overall is failing, and then what we do is we try to trust things that we shouldn't, and it's about like folly of man, and that's what horror is all about the folly of man. All he does is screw himself up and just make everything worse because of his hatred.
The one thing that occurred to me a little bit back when we were talking about people not feeling too involved with a lot of the films. One thing I do think is that it seemed like even with Netflix's backing, possibly resources were spread a little thin, and I think because of that, you see the first two films especially don't necessarily take full advantage of like the visual capacity of animation as a medium, because yes, there's like a lot of people talking, and that can be done very well. Like I said, I'm an Ava fan. That includes the last two episodes of the TV show. I think they're a great and creative solution to a lack of resources, but that's because they got creative with the visuals to try and visualize the things that they were talking about, despite a lack of time and money to fully animate things. Whereas a lot of the time with the anime trilogy, you just see a lot of people standing in fairly nondescript rooms, talking to each other. The sets of like spaceships and things generally look pretty sparse. You have some nice interiors in the caves with the Hotua and everything, but they're kind of just matte paintings in a way. There's not necessarily like some 3D animated environments that were like more immersive, that the camera moved more through. Might have like grabbed the attention more, but like it seems like what they basically did was like animated a low budget live action film for the most part, and then you see them mostly use what resources they did have in the end of the second film and in like the latter half of the third film. But there, to get to that, you have to go through a lot of stuff that's like kind of flat, not very well lit. All these characters look kind of samey, and they're all wearing the same thing. You don't even have like your Star Trek color coding, so keeping minor characters straight can be difficult. And yeah, I think there are like large portions of the films that are fairly weak visually, and if you have a lot of heavy philosophical discussion, it helps to throw in interesting visuals to illustrate those things. Like I said, the last 2 episodes of Neon Genesis Evangelion take things some very interesting places visually, even if it is hard to follow necessarily what's going on. But yeah, I think that was one issue, that if you couldn't necessarily have more action, you could at least stage, the conversations more interestingly. And Shin Godzilla 2 did a great job of that. Loads of boardroom scenes, but like interesting shots, fast, sharp editing, some good quick bits of humor in there. Like there were a fair amount of reviews that said, "Oh God, there's so many boardroom scenes," but I thought those were done very well in that film. But it seemed like the anime trilogy didn't necessarily have the same spark for the lengthy dialogue sequences. At least I thought.
So that's something I can jump on and talk to a couple of levels as anime junkie. First of all, Shizuno and Seshita are not Hideaki Anno. They don't have that experience. They don't have those chops. They don't have that raw talent. Like that's full stop. They don't have that visual flair. But I do think that some of the decisions might have been a bit intentional in terms of, everybody has a similar colored jumpsuit. Everything is very drab. It's very non-inspiring, especially in the first film, because it's just this. It's supposed to give this sense of despair. However, this is definitely budgetary also because these are cheap movies, and I keep hearing people say like, "Oh, this is animation, you can do anything," but that's not actually true. Like
it's time.
Yeah,
it's time multiplied by money.
Like
it's quality.
Like there are beautiful Japanese animated movies, but if you look at Ponyo, that cost twice as much as Godzilla Final Wars, which was not a cheap movie. So.
What makes animation more than anything, it's not just a magical, completely limitless medium. You need a good deal of talent and a lot of man hours to really get good animation a lot of the time.
Well, and that alone is 2 points. One is that the problem with a lot of the anime industry is that sometimes they'll not actually go into production on a lot of these projects, probably about a month or 2 before they're supposed to be released. In a lot of cases, and some animes are released generally, is like the very same week they're trying to complete the episode that's supposed to be released, and it could be easily a 26 or 13 episode run, and they're constantly having to stay over late. It's considered somewhat of a problem only for, as I was told, a handful, but it still doesn't lead to the fact that the way Japan likes to go is that they just if we can just do it in this much of time, this much of hours, and we just only do it for like a month or 2, then okay, it's very simple and stuff. So they try to get that out of the way. And for the directors, like first of all, I do condemn them completely on them trying to rat on the fans that just didn't like it as just being so-called classicals. Because look, there's enough directors out there that they need to start being snarky towards the fan base. That just is not gonna work out well for you. And to me, it's just like that's not gonna. In Japan, I know they have to have a sense of pride and stuff, but it's like swallow off your pride every now and then and get over it. Because I just, even as someone who, in this case, separate the art from the artist, because I still liked overall what they did produce, but at the same time, that still doesn't mean that I'm going to come after them. I'm not going to come after them and criticize them for just essentially trying to criticize the fan base on things that they didn't feel that you did too well on. So I mean. Leaving that off, but going back to the budgetary problem is that they have limited time, limited resources, and especially like this, that was probably there's a lot of stress involved for everyone who in the production, and unfortunately, that's in many ways how we actually got Godzilla so often in a suit is because it was just less time consuming, and that They could film this over a course of a few months rather than having to do a year, like in comparison to Godzilla King of the Monsters. It was 6 months done pretty much essentially before it could actually be released, and that's because they had plenty of time to go ahead, go back, do various CGI work, do any reshoots that they needed to do before they could complete the final product.
Was anybody else told that maybe what the director said in that little criticism of the fan base thing, that may have been a little bit of a mistranslation and then possibly an exaggeration on behalf of the media? Like, I heard that it might have been a little overblown.
Well, I've heard some things that have been cited from, I think, the commentary on the Japanese DVD and Blu-ray. I've heard that some things were translated and taken as serious that were really just some of the people involved kind of facetiously just sort of ribbing each other a little bit, as opposed to like very serious criticism. And so there is that barrier a little bit, and it's a little harder to evaluate things for ourselves through that language barrier, unfortunately.
Yeah, but that was the main, definitely why I saw Omniview about and stuff, and then that's what I've heard things, and I was told about that, but in this case, in this situation, is like, if it's lighter tone, then okay. If they're just making jokes, that's fine, but if depending on the context is everything, but if they were being serious, then you have to come out and try to, still condemn that in some way. But it's not like I'm saying that, maybe they did this, maybe they don't, but I'm still having to try to look at both arguments and still seeing as like, okay, if depending on the context, this is either it's this way or that way.
What happened? What did they say?
Yeah.
I think we had maybe Urobuchi saying about one of the other people involved in the project, a writer maybe, or one of the directors who was a bit more into the kind of traditional Godzilla films, like I don't know, something like, if he'd had it his way, we would have had a giant Mechagodzilla completely covered in missile launchers, and just the whole third film would have been one big fighter. Something to that effect.
The way there were two directors. One was supposed to be
Seshida said that.
Yeah. Seshida, wasn't he the big? He was actually the hardcore Godzilla fan that did this, and Shizuno essentially said he hadn't really seen a Godzilla film before, and that's where a lot of the altercations came from. Is that, for example, Godzilla being evolved from a plant, that came from him. Also, him having capable of electromagnetic powers and and shooting this particle beam instead of actually breathing fire. That was also is what was mentioned from all the sources I can gather was his suggestion. So he kind of, whether that is true or not, I don't know for the full extent. But by what I'm guessing is that the reason they were trying to make Godzilla so different is that he was like saying, because trees are the dominant life forms on the planet. There's so many of them around. He says, okay, well, let's try to see if Godzilla evolved from a plant-based creature. And then at the same time, it gets really complicated of why he essentially becomes this giant coil that can use electromagnetics. But he said at the same time, it was like, okay, does he really have to breathe fire? Can he just maybe shoot something, for example? And then they said, because trees produce electrons when they go through photosynthesis, that was the idea of if the creature seemingly evolved from a tree or so, then it would go through this hyper-fast evolution, and that's what it would do. But I'm trying to really simplify it because there's a lot more complexities, they said, of just the detail. And really, when you look back at it and just read all this, you go, okay, thank you. I think I got the gist of it, but that's a little complex. And that's what we've been trying to say is that, yes, it's very scientific, and it goes for even several things that are actually more fantasy than actual science, is what they were mentioning in certain portions. But yeah, that's the simplest way to put it. So Godzilla being the directors, the director, especially Shizuno, he said he was trying to make essentially a film that just basically anyone can enjoy. And that's what seems to have been probably the main goal I saw from the demographics, which was the most important, as I saw here, is that it was primarily aged for probably PG-13, so far as I could see. And so, I mean, the idea of nihilism and stuff, and then religion can be bad and stuff, like, these are all things that mostly a teenager would tend to think about a lot of times. So, if you're a full grown-up and adult, you're like, I've already heard about these things, I don't care about them anymore. I'm going off my life, I'm living, I'm fine.
Well, it also seems like, if I can
Oh, no, by all means,
interject for a
if you
second.
guys have any other suggestions, because I'm just trying to pretty much keep it going at this point.
You know, it does seem like they were trying to get people really invested in the human drama, and they were kind of aiming to hook new audiences with that angle, because you see it in a lot of the promotional material. We had all these character bios and things with background and personality profiles, whether they really figured that much into the actual finished movies or not. And I think there was like even in one of the little Chirashi poster pamphlet things, there was even like a relationship chart or something like that between the different characters, which is something you see for a lot of more character-driven anime a lot of the time. So it seems like they were trying to aim to get people invested sort of along those lines, as opposed to necessarily what, you know, just bring in the same kaiju fans who would see it anyway.
It was trying to draw in more audiences. Is that if you did something different with Godzilla, it was supposed to do two things. One, would it do a satisfactory one for, you know, both the Godzilla fandom and then at the same time try to introduce new audiences. And from what I heard is that, again, from the various sources, that okay, a few women younger women actually kind of got interested in it, and it seems like that demographic has gone slightly up so far as I know. But again, I'm mostly the information I can get, because I'm not in Japan and stuff, is very limited, so that's as much as I could get. But yeah, the films were definitely designed in a way that it wouldn't be traditional Godzilla, and at the same time it could try to do, but it would try to keep it a little bit towards the originals enough so that hopefully fans would be satisfied, and at the same time they could draw in, you know, the international audience, which, you know, is entirely subjective. You can't always expect, you know, to get the exact same result. You can't exactly, because a lot of what they did is that it seems like when it comes to experimentation, it seems like all the changes they did, it's like they were just changing it just for the sake of change. It wasn't really trying to, you know, do something truly groundbreaking at certain points, it seemed like.
That is a good point, actually, because I was just thinking when you were mentioning Godzilla being a plant, it's like, you know, it's one of a few interesting ideas that I feel like doesn't really go much of anywhere, because it's like, yes, Godzilla is a plant now and operates using these electromagnetic coils, but like, how much does the plant thing really figure into the story at all?
I don't think it's mentioned in the movies.
Yeah.
It's mostly there to explain how Godzilla can survive for
it's
like 20,000 years.
That's true. It is an interesting aesthetic flourish, and it ties in, I think, with how they kind of show that like nature has sort of taken back the planet, but it doesn't really affect too much of what actually happens in the story.
Yeah, and I mean,
But hey, how about
the Q&A session?
yeah, let's
Yeah.
Okay,
would
I
you
think
guys like to
we are
contribute something to
definitely
this
at that point, 'cause-
dialogue dominated by us up here
Oh
at the
yeah,
table?
I was.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, quick question, we never got an introduction. Who are you guys?
I was gonna say. Yeah, we
I
probably
heard
should
you
go
like
there in the
5
first
minutes
place.
in, and I was like, oh, too late.
I figured we could say
They're going
something
back.
at the end, but yeah.
I'm Will Offutt. I run the Kyodai Kino YouTube channel. I don't know, some of you might have seen I actually did a kind of long YouTube video about the anime trilogy as a collaborative effort with another YouTuber called Blue Nova. So if you'd like to see some of my arguments made more eloquently and concisely with some visual aids, you might check that out.
Kevin Derendorf. I run a blog called Mazer Patrol and wrote a book called Kaiju for Hipsters. I go to anime conventions and yell at people about tokusatsu, and tokusatsu conventions and yell at people about anime.
I'm Ira Taborn. I managed to get to the table first.
Brian Scherschel. I run Kaijuvision Radio, and I did an three-part episode on the anime movies with Daniel DeManna at the Godzilla Novelization Project, and it's very atypical. It's quite positive and examines a lot of more stuff that, kind of appreciate.
Okay, yeah. Chris Little. Again, you pretty much like this is actually only my second time doing this, but like I said before, I just enough of a fan that finally decided, it's my second panel doing this, so finally decided to take the rings and actually start doing this for a change. But yeah, as far as social media and stuff, I don't fortunately have much. I got a blog, but other than that, though, I really haven't gotten too much out there yet. But G fan around here that managed to see where the structure, knowing Geno Urobuchi, I knew where this was going, and yes, I'm being a bit of a narcissist here, get over it. But it comes down as that, yes, I predicted that mostly of what would be the outcome. The people who told me, they would never, believe, the people who know me, I would never stop talking about this and how it was structured and how it would go. And so, at least at the very, I have some idea of what it was going for and a decent idea on anime and Godzilla itself to see where this entire project at the end went and how it turned out. So with that, let's go ahead and hang on questions. All right. Was there one person in the back who really raised their hand?
Yeah, there was some.
Yeah.
Okay, you'll
His arm is
no, you
tired.
can come next. And then her.
Hi, and thank you for putting this together. So I watched this with my wife, which usually we do, and there were kind of two criticisms she had, one of which I agreed with, one of which I didn't agree with, and one of them ties into expectations. It wasn't what she was expecting from a kaiju film, and from my perspective, it clearly wasn't a kaiju film. It was a response to Godzilla, the original Godzilla, but it doesn't fit into that genre, which I think you sort of talked about. But then the issue we both had was we felt like the characters, especially the female characters, were very poorly developed from what we've become happily accustomed to from Toho over the years.
I would agree with that. That last
Many,
point. For
many
sure.
cases.
My only defense of
Yuko
that would
was
be
wrong.
every character that's not the main character is relatively poorly developed.
Yeah. Like I said, Haru was more developed, and like I said, some of the characters that represented them were a little bit more developed than usual. But yeah, they were supposed to be pretty much secondary characters and what they did. But believe me, certain things like the love interest. Okay, I can get how Yuko probably likes him, but Miana and Mina barely knew him, and then I was like, okay, fine, maybe he can have Miana, whatever. Like, they have some connection, and then, no, it's to Mina. I was like, okay, why?
It's just how they say hello. You don't know.
Yeah, I never really got that. Believe me, as someone who does it, like, that is definitely something that's, like, underdeveloped. It's like, what the heck were you thinking of? Like, you can have a sex scene in a Godzilla movie and stuff and things, but, okay, should there at least be some more of a connection other than, oh, hello, yeah, you saved me once before. But anyways, and then essentially what comes down to is like you do it with him because out of pity sex. That's the best I can do it. So okay, going on.
Actually, I want to
you in
point
the
out
back with the hat.
one of the twins. I noticed she seems like in one scene you might have noticed she's always seeming more curious, open, whereas the other one's more serious and
Yeah, exactly.
They call that out in the movie. So.
Like they call that out in the movie, but
going off of that, it felt like one of those things that Genrobuchi was trying to do with, like, he loves twists, but I don't think it was really set up. It might have been foreshadowed subtly at some point, but I never really understood why they chose to do that.
well, I guess what they were trying to make sure that Haru, to preserve his bloodline, because they were going to say that in some way, yes. Okay, if he's going to die after this, then in some ways besides memorializing him, which I got it, some people may or may disagree. I can easily talk more in depth about it if people want to. But yeah, mostly of him, and then yes, saying goodbye to a child and stuff is like, okay, you barely knew this guy from what? You rescued him from a crash, and then, they're telepaths, so they seemingly know about people, and then really what it comes down is that they feel bad for him. Like, that's really why they did it. Like, they feel bad for him, they feel some sympathy towards him, whereas at least with Yuko it was like okay, she in some way has known him for some time and kind of seemed like she saw him like inspiration.
Really feel bad for anyone. I want to feel bad for
your hand up a
Yuko.
little while, haven't you?
She just got.
Yes. I thought, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, he's been holding up his hand.
What do you guys think of the two prequel novels that were released to tie in with the trilogy?
I haven't read them.
They're interesting.
There's a couple of videos that Wikizilla thankfully did, and so unfortunately the novels are limited because they're all in Japanese, so we can't unfortunately really know exactly what was going on with them. But I actually like the novels in depth because, for me, like I said, I didn't see Godzilla as the villain, and when you look at these novels and you see all the chaos going on through each one, you start to realize, okay, none of this can end without bloodshed. That's just the period of it. And from Godzilla's perspective, it's like people say it, but his personality in this one specifically is that he puts Earth first before everything else. And so the reason he did all this, he killed everyone, and he did it is because he was trying to set this all back down to what he was trying to reverse what was being done. He thought, if I took over, this probably wouldn't happen. And in a way, this is the biggest irony, because the novels did so much justice, especially if you have 4 factions. Godzilla took them all on, and he managed to come out victorious. And when you think about it, all the other ones would have still led eventually Earth being destroyed. Earth would have, then so everybody else would have lost. But with him taking over, at least trying, restarting it, at least, they can undo it.
People keep saying, go ahead.
I think we had like 3 different directions going for a second there.
Sorry. A reaction to the novels.
I haven't read them.
Was it released here in the US?
And then maybe
the stories about all the kaiju and what they end up doing, that's really cool. I thought that was cool. I had somebody tell me what some of it in the Japanese was, and I thought it was really awesome.
Yeah, and in my opinion, they should have probably turned those novels into a film.
They should have turned that to the end.
Have you ever read the Silmarillion? Okay,
that's
so
kind of the vibe it is.
Yeah,
it's very much that vibe.
Yeah, so it's a bunch of short, unrelated stories that if you tried to make a movie out of it, it would not work very well. So.
Okay.
Are those novels available here in the U.S.?
No. Best probably just go on to Wikizilla YouTube and then just type in like Monster Apocalypse, and then you'll be able to, and then they'll have about like 10-minute videos that essentially do an entire timeline explanation of all the events that happened. And you watch those 2, and believe me, you'll over 70% of what you probably had figured out what was going on around here answered. And then do we at least have one last question? I know she's been having her hand up.
So go for it.
My question was, I attended this panel because I haven't seen any of these movies. Because I heard they were bad, and I never put in the time. Because I was like, why do I want to watch this? So as a person who's not personally a fan of Lovecraftian nihilism, out of all, could we get a vote? Should I watch them or not? Because I don't know. They sound rather.
You can decide.
I would advocate.
Whether it's good or not.
That's true.
I would say with pretty much anything, watch it for yourself, form your own opinion. Going through it once, it's like, it's a bit more of a time investment than any of the other films, but it's worth it just so you've seen it and you have your own observations on it, and you know that you don't like it for yourself, or that you do.
The best way to go about it is just to binge watch all 3 of them through. And if you just binge watch all 3 of them through, you'll have an idea, because the problem was that 6 months is what we said was such a long timeline. It's like, okay, please, maybe I forget this or stuff. Just, if you want to take the time out, if you have maybe about 3-4 hours of your time a day, if you choose to. And again, it's your choice. It's entirely your choice, but if you choose to do that, then you can decide.
Yes, I could clean.
Since you guys all said,
Yes, that
so as you were saying, and for her, since you all seem to say positive things about this trilogy, my question is, how many times did you watch it? Did it really hit you the first time, or did you have to rewatch it to kind of get it? Because on some of them I did rewatch, or because it's anime and I like to watch both subbed and dubbed.
The end of the 3rd movie, the first time watching it, I cried. It affected me.
I've seen the whole thing at least.
I've been watched them numerous times. It's kind of frightening how many times I bothered to sit down and see it. Like the first week, I would not stop watching The Planet Eater. I would just watch that every single day, almost very religiously. So unless the way to go about it is, again, it's just the pros and the cons with it. You got to decide really for yourself.
I like this first time I got more on a rewatch. So there's a lot of doublespeak that goes on with especially some of the alien characters that
the deception. You don't get the deception the first time through.
Yeah.
There's a limit when you watch the first when you watch the first one and the second one when you're new, and then you watch the third one and you go back.
Yeah.
There's like a bunch of additional layers to the first two that you didn't.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You might not catch everything the first time around, so yeah, for some people, if you think you need to go back and maybe you want to find more, then that's your decision. But if you can catch it the first time or something, then again, all yours. Okay, last question.
The one last like shout out I wanted to give, because no one mentioned it this whole time. Like, even if you watch it and you think the ideas are garbage and you hate it all, the production design is absolutely stellar. And like the high concept science fiction of the first one is what drew me in, and all the technology and the fact, and you really, you know, we said it was micro budget anime, but you couldn't do that in live action without a Hollywood budget.
Yeah, I want Toys of the Raptors.
All the spaceships, man.
So since we're talking about production stuff, I'll also throw this out here. If you have not seen it, I try not to take sides on the dub versus subs debate, because I think it's all stupid. Do whatever you want that works for you. In this circumstance, I would suggest subs for one simple reason. The dubbing has some of the worst audio mixing I have ever seen.
And the thing about voice actors in Japan, one thing you can always expect from them, excellent acting.
However, the guy that does Metfi's voice for the English version is like, he has done a lot of anime, and I liked his voice.
Like, the dubbing's actually good. That's what frustrated me the most. The dubbing is good, but the audio mixing is terrible. There are action scenes where you cannot hear anyone talking. In a film where most of the film is people sitting around talking.
Just so you know, there are anime with good dubs. Look at Cowboy Bebop.
Cowboy Bebop, Gurren Lagann.
Bakano.
Thank you.
Let's go on. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Good job. Thank you.